Sup, turfs?
Hey, what's up, Jack?
I want to talk today about one idea and one question, and that is, I think it's overlooked and it's not given the due consideration and respect that it deserves. And that is, what is transgenderism and is it real? Now I'm going to harp on this a bit because I think we underestimate just how important this question is, because the whole ideology is founded on this definition of transgenderism, and we don't talk about it enough. If you're a TERF or somebody that's just been down the rabbit hole, chances are you know a lot about gender ideology. You probably know about chromosomes. You probably know about large and small gametes and the respective sex-based developmental pathways that come with them. You'll know what an autogynephile is. You'll know what rapid onset gender dysphoria is, and that it's a peer social contagion and a maladaptive coping strategy. You will you will know about false equivalencies, appeals to emotion, appeals to empathy traps. You'll know that the demographics or the demographic profiles for male and female representation for transgenderism is vastly different. You know that young women, it occurs in a homogenous cluster outbreaks for young women only, but not for adult men. We'll know and we'll talk about all of this, but what we don't know is a precise definition of what transgenderism is. Now, in a book, Think Again, the author and psychologist, he talks about society's most successful thinkers, and he says or argues that they're not academics or scientists or financially successful people or those with the most or the highest IQ. They're those with the ability to rethink or audit their beliefs. And I think that's what we need to do in regards to our belief about transgenderism. What is it? What is the claim? I know a lot of good TERFs that will fall prey to the true trans fallacy. You know, they'll say, how are we supposed to differentiate between an autogynephile and a true trans person? I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a trap. That presupposes that transgenderism is real, and says the problem is that we need to be able to differentiate between AGPs and true trans. The real problem is autogynephilia itself, rapid onset gender dysphoria itself. And it's not knowing precisely what transgenderism is. The real problem is the erasure of sex-based rights. So, debate grows online. We'll talk about this concept of steel-manning your opponent's argument, which is trying to represent it in good faith and intellectually honest fashion. And that's what I want to do today about the definition of transgenderism and is it real? And that's what I think we should all go through the exercise of doing. So, for me, I thought about this for a bit, and I break it down into three categories. And that is, it is self-reported, that's the first part. Faith-based claim, second part. That you have a gendered soul or an entity that is born in the wrong body.
Where are all the right bodies?
We're all the right bodies.
No, we found a meat suit.
But what we need to realise is how significant this definition is. All that stuff I talked about, third spaces, chromosomes, it all rests on this definition of what is transgenderism and is it real. If you cannot unconditionally answer yes to it's real, then why are we arguing about third spaces and identification and identity? None of it really matters unless we can say, yes, transgenderism is unconditionally real.
Yes, transgenderism is unconditionally real.
So if we start off, I want to dissect those three categories in good faith. So we have self-reported. Now self-reported, a proxy for self-reported, what radical gender extremists will use is self-identified. I prefer self-declaration, but a data scientist would use self-reported, so we'll go with that. But I want to talk about self-identification or self-identified is a misnomer because it implies a correct categorization. Transgenderism is not a real category So it cannot be correctly identified, and certainly not by the self. Radical gender extremists will love to appeal to authority when it suits them. They'll say, you ask them what's a woman? They'll say, oh, I'm not a biologist. I'm not a biologist, I can't answer that. When we use our eyes and say that man wearing a dress is a man, they'll say, how do you know? You don't have a PhD in biology. Show me 5 peer-reviewed studies. Why do we appeal to authority in some contexts, but not the context of self-identification? Now, another point I want to make about self-identification, or self-reporting I should say, in a book, Dataclysm, the author is a data scientist and founder of OkCupid, the longest running dating website in America, and he has a lot of interesting insights about behaviour, dating preferences, sexuality. And he has one of the largest data sets to draw on. He talks about data categories in three broad categories, and he calls it observed, unobserved, and self-reported. So observed behaviour would be, an example of his book would be stated preferences. So a man would say, this is the age of the partner that I'm looking for. But that's not as robust, that's subject to bias. It's not as accurate as unobserved behaviour, which is what he describes as how you behave when you think nobody's looking. So unobserved behaviour in the same context would be the age of the profile that the man actually looks at and how long he looks at them for. And they're different. But the least robust and the most useless and worthless is self-reported. In the context of his book, he did a meta-analysis, and the example he used was for bisexuality, self-reporting. So for men, over 20 years, aggregate data, he found that only 5% of men that self-reported to be bisexual messaged both sexes. So the mechanism of self-reporting, in the context of bisexuality, 95% of men were liars. So why are we expected to believe that the mechanism of self-reporting doesn't work for bisexuality, but it will work for transgenderism? Last time I looked, we got both letters are in the LGBT. So it's completely useless for the B, but we're supposed to believe that it's accurate and worthwhile for the T. We just believe men, because men in dresses are just so reputable. They're paragons of virtue, bastions of propriety. Us TERFs may have just been born yesterday, but we stayed up all night. So, for the first part, self-reported, it's not looking so good. On to the second part, which is faith-based claim. This is fair, it's a faith-based claim. Nobody can dispute this. So, we have a lot of science worshippers these days. You know, we need a peer-reviewed study. Show me some definitions. Everything's about science. There's a little thing called the scientific method, and for something to be considered scientifically valid, it must be observable, falsifiable, and recreatable. Transgenderism does not satisfy a single one of those criteria. Why? In the context of homosexuality, so in some cultures, being gay may be considered shameful. So you may have an example of a man that's married with kids, that's cheating on his wife and having sex with men. Then, even though he says he's straight, it doesn't matter. The last category, a gendered soul or entity that is born in the wrong body. Now, they will actually use a gendered soul. So this presupposes that we must believe in souls to begin with. But an interesting thing you'll notice as well is, it's such an absurd proposition, gendered soul born in the wrong body, that some institutions, they won't use it, they'll use doublespeak. And they'll say instead, have a look at the language, and they'll say, somebody with a profound sense of unknowing or disconnect. You know, but it all amounts to the same thing. It is basically a separation from the mind and the body, some sort of identity that is different. The mind is not separate from the body. In the same way that strength cannot be divorced from health, the mind cannot be divorced from the body. This needs us to have a Cartesian sense of dualism, that the two are separate, the mind and the body, but they are not. There's a turf by the name of Exelantic that makes a great point. And she talks about brain injury, traumatic brain injury, and she says that, for examples, language is a social construct, and supposedly gender is a social construct. Yet, for the brain, there's areas of the brain that are responsible for different function, for recognizing faces, for interpreting language. Yet, if somebody has a traumatic brain injury, they can be developmentally disabled or impaired in their cognitive ability to process language. If transgenderism is real, why is there no part in the brain responsible for interpreting it? Why is it not subject to developmental disability? Because it is not real. So, in closing, I just want to say, I think what we should do is audit our beliefs and ask ourselves, what is the foundational claim of transgenderism, and is it real? Because we need to realize how significant this question and definition is. Thank you.